Border outrage. A Texas state trooper's allegations about the mistreatment of migrants at the southern border sparks investigations and condemnation. Reaction from Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Democratic State Representative Victoria Neave Criado. Gag order. The lieutenant governor says he set new rules to ensure the Ken Paxton impeachment trial is fair. We ask him if his campaign contributions will impact that. And tax cuts after state lawmakers pass bills to lower your school property tax bill. Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson says he wants people to pay less on the city portion of their property taxes as well. I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts right now. Hello and welcome. Just when it seemed as if a calm had set over the Texas Capitol after the regular legislative session and two special sessions, controversy has erupted again. An email from a state trooper in Eagle Pass says officers along the southern border have been told to push migrants back into the Rio Grande and not to give them water. The state is investigating these claims after Governor Greg Abbott and DPS have strongly denied them. Here's Ken Molestina.
The leaked email obtained independently by CBS News was sent to DPS brass earlier this month by a trooper working in Eagle Pass. In it, the trooper voices his concern for alleged orders they were given when handling migrants at the border. In one instance, he recalls coming across a large group of asylum seekers, including small children, and adds, "We called the shift officer in command, and we were given orders to push the people back into the water to go to Mexico. We decided this was not the correct thing to do." He also writes, "The wire and barrels in the river needs to be taken out, as this is nothing but an inhumane trap in high water and low visibility. Due to the extreme heat, the order to not give people water needs to be immediately reversed as well." In addition, he said, "I truly believe in the mission of Operation Lone Star. I believe we have stepped over a line into the inhumane. We need to operate it correctly in the eyes of God."
The Statue of Liberty right now is crying, seeing and hearing these allegations about
Domingo Garcia, the national president of the League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC, was quick to respond to the allegations. So was DPS, saying in a statement, "The Office of the Inspector General is investigating the allegations made in the email in question. There is not a directive or policy that instructs troopers to withhold water from migrants or push them back into the river."
Who do you believe, Texas DPS, or do you believe this trooper?
I believe the whistleblower. I believe that this is a decent man who could not believe that these were the orders that they were being given on the ground.
It's a belief echoed by Texas State Senator Roland Gutierrez, who's leading a group of Democratic politicians in asking the U.S. Justice Department to look into the claims.
If the current investigation into these allegations proves that this is true, whose hands do you think this falls on?
I think it falls on Steve McCraw and every one of his hierarchy within the Department of DPS. I think it falls on this governor. It is a federal crime. It is a federal crime to use your office to cause harm to somebody.
A joint statement by the governor, his border czar Mike Banks, the head of Texas DPS, and the Texas Military Department said, quote, "No orders or directions have been given under Operation Lone Star that would compromise the lives of those attempting to cross the border illegally." The Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas Military Department continue taking steps to monitor migrants in distress, provide appropriate medical attention when needed, and encourage them to use one of the 29 international bridges along the Texas-Mexico border where they can safely and legally cross. Since then, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it's looking into the legality of the state's use of concertina wire at the border. Mexico's president called the state's alleged actions inhumane. Texas Democrats in Congress, including Congressman Colin Allred of Richardson, sharply criticized the governor after hearing the allegation.
We can uphold our immigration laws and secure our border without resorting to these barbaric and cruel tactics.
And so now what may come next is state legislative hearings at the Capitol.
There are numerous concerns.
Representative Victoria Neave Criado of Mesquite and other lawmakers tell me there have already been discussions about holding committee hearings at the Texas Capitol after a state trooper's concerns went public that migrants are being mistreated by Texas officers along the southern border.
But two, having legislative hearings on these issues to investigate specifically what other policies and procedures are being put in place that are potentially violating federal law or international laws.
The troopers' email to DPS commanders obtained by CBS News said they were given orders to push people back into the Rio Grande and not give them water. One part of his email said, quote, "I truly believe in the mission of Operation Lone Star. I believe we have stepped over a line into the inhumane. We need to operate it correctly in the eyes of God." Governor Greg Abbott, his border czar, and the heads of Texas DPS and the Texas Military Department insisted Tuesday that, quote, "no orders or directions have been given under Operation Lone Star that would compromise the lives of those attempting to cross the border illegally."
I got you.
Since the troopers' emails became public, Texas DPS spokesman Lieutenant Chris Olivares has tweeted videos like this one of state troopers rescuing people who've crossed into Texas illegally, giving them water and providing care to those in need. Reports say migrants have been injured by razor wire along the border, including a 19-year-old woman experiencing a miscarriage. I asked Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick about the situation during an interview Tuesday.
We're just trying to protect our state, protect our country the best of our ability when the federal government's not doing the job. But of course, we want to do everything we do in the most humane way that we possibly can.
We commend the DPS trooper who was willing to step forward.
During our interview with the Lieutenant Governor this week, he insisted the upcoming impeachment trial of suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton will be fair. It comes after Patrick issued a gag order and news about his campaign contributions.
And so I have to protect the jury. I have to keep this a fair trial. The defendant deserves a fair trial.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who will be presiding over Ken Paxton's impeachment trial, tells me the gag order he issued is crucial. It keeps the senators, who are the jurors, the House of Representatives, Paxton and his attorneys, and witnesses from making statements that would prejudice the trial, threaten a fair trial, and impair the court's ability to maintain a fair and impartial court.
And so the reason for the gag order is to get people on both sides to step back and not be talking about this case moving forward, or not be leveling any accusations from either side.
The Texas Tribune reports Patrick received a $1 million contribution and a $2 million loan from the Defend Texas Liberty PAC, a conservative group that has criticized Paxton's impeachment. What do you say to Texans who may be concerned about that and your previous call and continued call for impartiality in the trial?
Well, Jack, there are people on many sides of this case who contribute to senators and to my campaign. And so we will all take an oath of impartiality, and that's not an issue whatsoever. And we're going to have a fair trial.
Last week, the Texas legislature passed bills to cut property taxes that pay for public schools by $18 billion for both homeowners and businesses. Voters will have to approve in November.
It's cutting your school taxes, Jack, 41%. 41%. Unheard of. And for business properties, 23%. And so that will be in the Constitution when people vote on it in November. That will be in the Constitution. That always has to be funded. What we're doing, we can maintain moving forward.
One piece of unfinished business for lawmakers, giving teachers a raise. The Lieutenant Governor says there's $5 billion set aside in the budget for additional school funding, including a boost in teacher pay.
But we'll eventually pass a teacher pay raise, I believe, in October. And after we get through with this impeachment trial in September, and we'll move forward, because education will be on the call. Whatever we pass, if we have our way, will be a permanent raise, not just a one-time raise.
The governor's office has said a third special session will be held this fall. As for Paxton's impeachment trial in the Senate, it begins September 5th. He has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. After state lawmakers passed a package of bills designed to cut your school property taxes, Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson wants to focus on lowering the city portion of the property tax bill for homeowners and business owners.
This table's one of my projects.
Sammy Hargrove moved to his house in South Oak Cliff in 1987, and during those 36 years, he says he's watched his home value and property taxes grow, and he says recent inflation has hurt.
For someone who's nearly 80 years old on Social Security and fixed income, things get squeezed from every direction.
Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson says he wants the city to provide homeowners like Hargrave real relief.
I want to actually deliver actual property tax relief on the city portion of your tax bill by having your city tax bill lower.
This year, the city's property tax rate is 74.58 cents per $100 valuation, a nearly 3-cent drop from the year before. The question is, what would the property tax rate have to be for the city of Dallas for residents to see a lower property tax bill than last year? Right now, the city manager and administrators are in the process of developing a proposed budget for next year. Councilmember Kara Mendelson says she believes the city can give property owners a break because the city's property tax revenues and sales tax revenues have kept rising.
So there's not a shortage of dollars coming into the city. What's happening is, how are we spending our dollars? And I think that's where we're going to have to make some choices and show some fiscal restraint.
It's extremely important for every level of government to look into ways to provide property tax relief.
Councilmember Jaime Resendez says the city must also continue to provide a high level of services as efficiently and effectively as possible.
I represent a district in Southeast Dallas that feels like it's been long ignored. So we need to make sure that we're providing services, we're providing resources to communities in, that feel that way.
For Sammy Hargrove, the message to city council members and the mayor is simple.
Give us some help.
Coming up next, more of our extensive interview with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and later more of our discussion with Democratic State Representative Victoria Neave Criado of Mesquite. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We spoke with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick this week about the southern border, the upcoming Ken Paxton impeachment trial in the Senate, property tax cuts, and teacher pay raises. Here's more of our interview.
Jack, to be candid with you, I have seen the article, but I'm not aware of the email. It's not been brought to my attention personally or in my position as Lieutenant Governor of the state. But of course, we'll look into that. And, you know, it's an email, as I understand, from someone on the border to someone at DPS, and we'll just have to look into it.
Is it concerning to you?
Of course, it would be concerning to me. At the same time, Jack, I will tell you that the reason we put up concertina wire and the reason we're putting the buoys in the river is to stop people from coming. You know, at the last year of Trump, we had the border under control. About 400,000 people or so were apprehended on the border. About 2/3 of those in Texas, because the border is 1,900 miles from San Diego to Brownsville. We're about 1,250 miles of that part. And then in the first year of Biden, it's been 2 million apprehended, or near 2 million every year, plus the gotaways, hundreds of thousands, plus, Jack, the ones we never see who cross the border. So we cannot absorb this influx of people coming here illegally into our state and into our country. We used to spend, every time I would write the budget in the past, up until Biden came into office, we spent about $800 million on the budget. We do a 2-year budget, $400 million a year. And this past budget is $4 billion of our Texas taxpayer money. There is nothing wrong with protecting your country and protecting your state. Obviously, you want to do it in a humane way, but it's, look, Joe Biden, anyone who drowns in the river, anyone who is thrown into sex slavery, any criminal that crosses the border, which they do, and all those things I just described happen every day. It's Joe Biden's fault. He said, keep coming, just keep coming. He doesn't really care if babies are drowning in the river. He doesn't care if people are put into child or sex slavery as a young girl. He doesn't care that the #1 killer of Americans under 45 is fentanyl. So this all goes back to him. We're just trying to protect our state, protect our country the best of our ability when the federal government's not doing the job. But of course, we want to do everything we do in the most humane way that we possibly can.
Another story that made headlines was the gag order that you issued yesterday in the Paxton impeachment trial. Why was that necessary in your mind?
So I'm under an order of the impeachment rules that the Senate passed 25-3 about a month ago. And so I can't talk too much about the trial, only what's been in the public arena, which we published the rules and we put out our press release yesterday, and we posted on our website. By the way, anyone wanting to stay up to date on the trial before the trial and once it begins on September 5th can go to LTGOV, Lieutenant Gov, ltgov.texas.gov, and they can see what's happening every day on the motions that are filed before the trial, et cetera. So the reason I put the gag order out, Jack, was that both sides have been making inflammatory comments, and I'm saying what I said in my press release, so I'm staying inside my guidelines and my rules that I have on me. Both sides have been saying some rather inflammatory things. I think about this, Jack. In a normal trial, you have a jury pool, and you select from that jury pool. Our jury pool is 31 senators. They will be set according to the Constitution. So in a normal trial, if someone is prejudiced potentially by something they've read or heard or seen, well, they could be excused from the jury. And so I have to protect the jury. I have to keep this a fair trial. The defendant deserves a fair trial. And so the reason for the gag order is to get people on both sides to step back and not be talking about this case moving forward, or not be leveling any accusations from either side. And that's the reason for the gag order.
I wanted to ask you about a Texas Tribune report this morning that your campaign reported a $1 million contribution and a $2 million loan from the group Defend Texas Liberty PAC, which has been critical of the impeachment and has defended Attorney General Ken Paxton. What do you say to Texans who may be concerned about that and your previous call and continued call for impartiality in the trial?
Well, Jack, there are people on many sides of this case who contribute to senators and to my campaign. And so we will all take a oath of impartiality, and that's not an issue whatsoever. The issue really here is, for me as the presiding officer and the judge, is to have a fair trial. And I think, Jack, that what you've seen by what we've done so far has really amazed a lot of people. Many thought we might just dismiss it. Well, we're bound by the Constitution to do so, to have the trial. And if you did dismiss it, it would go back over there and the House could hold it for a year or two, who knows? And Attorney General Paxton would still not be able to work. So we will take it on, but we've been, again, I'm staying under my orders here. I'm talking about the rules that we passed, 31 rules, Jack, voted on 25-3 by the Senate, but there were a few senators missing during that time. But those rules are very clear, and we're going to have a fair trial, and the defense will have a chance to make their case, and as will the House managers who created this impeachment. So, Jack, we're all moving forward. The 12 Democrats, the 19 Republicans, everyone will take that oath.
I did have one other quick question on that.
Sure.
How concerned are you about the outside influence on senators, particularly Republican senators, who are going to be the jurors in this case?
Well, I don't think you should separate it out into Republican or Democrats. And Jack, I'm under impeachment rules not to discuss the case. So I'm not going to discuss that or my opinions of what's happening on the outside. My gag order that I issued yesterday as the judge of this trial is very clear that obviously there is a concern. So if you read the gag order, which I know you have, and people can go to ltgov.texas.gov and read that and all the other motions and all of the rules. People ask me all the time about what's happening, how's this happening? All the rules are published for this trial. And so that's how I answered. That was reason for the gag order. Of course, there's would be concern there.
Want to ask you about the property tax cut deal.
Yes.
That was
finally to the biggest news of ever in the history of the country in terms of property tax relief. But go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask you, is this something that the state can sustain? And when we've seen these kind of deals before, property taxes for schools have crept back up. How will the state try to keep that from happening this time?
So, Jack, I know you always do this full length on your podcast, I guess, or you post it online. This is a great opportunity for me to answer that question in long form, because you don't have enough time on television for me to explain it in a 2-minute story. But Jack, here's the deal. What you just said, you're absolutely right. It used to be that way in the old days. Appraisals went up and whatever tax relief you received kind of disappeared. That's the way it was 15, 20 years ago, even as recent as 5 or 6 years ago. What we did in 2019, Jack, was we separated for the first time ever your appraisal that comes out in the spring and your tax bill, which comes out in October or November. Before that, whatever your appraisal went up, it went up 7 or 8 or 9%. You could pretty much count on your tax bill going up the same. The local entities never cut the taxes back, even though the values went up. So today, Jack, and if you, and I challenge all of your viewers too, and there's always an exception to the rule, but if you go back and look in 2021, go back a year, look at what your appraisal was in the spring, and then what was your tax bill. And you'll see that your tax bill was much less than your appraisal, almost in all cases. In fact, the Houston Chronicle wrote an article that for the first time in decades, property taxes for schools actually went down for many people, or flat, or only up a little bit. And it's because, Jack, we have capped the growth of budgeting in school districts to 2.5%. They can't grow any more than 2.5% from year to year. And cities and counties cannot grow any more than 3.5% from year to year unless the people vote for higher taxes. So what happens as the value goes up, see it as a seesaw, your value goes up. By the way, everybody wants to sell their house for more than they paid for it. It's not a bad thing. You just don't want to be taxed on it. So as your value goes up, Jack, they have to lower the tax rate to get the seesaw down to no more than 3.5 on average, or 2.5 at the schools. And so the appraisals are not the factor. They're essentially not a factor at all. And again, this year, people have gotten their appraisals this past spring, a few months ago. Wait till October, November, and compare the two. So that's the reason, Jack, what we're doing now will not, the homestead never goes away. People will vote on that $100,000 homestead exemption, which you know that I and the Senate fought for. We never took one step back on that because it's huge, Jack. So if you live in the average $300,000 home in Texas, which is $300,000 to $330,000, that's the average home. So now you're going to be paying school taxes on a $200,000 home. And by the way, Jack, for 397 school districts out of 1,014 in the state, for 397 districts, the average value, Jack, of the homes in those districts are $100,000, mostly rural, small counties, small towns. So that means their school property taxes are disappearing, going away. And the tax bill that you're going to get, Jack, and every one of your viewers with this bill that Senator Paul Betancourt passed and the entire Senate, myself, worked on hard for years, but particularly this session, and we never backed up from it. It's cutting your school taxes, Jack, 41%. 41%, unheard of. And for business properties, 23%. And so that will be in the Constitution when people vote on it in November. That will be in the Constitution. That always has to be funded. The compression piece, which is actually reducing the school rate, that depends on the sales tax flow we have any given year. But I believe, Jack, what we're doing, we can maintain moving forward. And so I'm comfortable with where we are. And look, Jack, when I came into the Senate in 2007, to give you a sense of things, how fast we've grown, and inflation along the way, really high under Biden, but it goes up every year. When I came in, Jack, the first budget from memory in 2007 was $165 billion. That's a 2-year budget. This year it was $300 billion or more. That's how much we've grown, Jack. So you absorb what you don't ever, like the surplus. You don't want to stack everything into ongoing cost. So we were very careful about that. What you want to do is put a lot of that money into one-time costs. Like we created the new Texas University Fund for $3 billion, one time. Put $1 billion into Parks and Wildlife to buy land, one time. So you do one-time things that you don't have to maintain, and then you do other things that you do have to maintain, and you try to keep those in that area that we can support ongoing.
I want to ask you about teacher raises. When can they expect them, and about how much?
We gave them a raise in 2019, and I drove that. I campaigned on it, of giving every teacher thousands of dollars in raises. We put $2 billion into teacher pay in 2015, outside the way we normally fund schools, because we looked at it, Jack, over a 10-year period. School district funding had increased 35%, but teacher pay had only gone up 11%. It wasn't that we didn't have money in the system. It wasn't getting to the most important. It wasn't getting to the most important person in the system, and that's the teacher. The most important, next to your parents, most important person your child will be with as they're growing up. I believe teaching should be a profession, not just a job. So we put $2 billion in then, and we've continued that, maintain those raises. And now this year we have, Jack, $5 billion set aside in the budget for additional school funding, which includes a teacher pay raise. And what the Senate passed in our budget was $6,000 for teachers in districts with 20,000 kids or less, because our suburban and urban teachers, for the most part, make more money than our rural teachers. So we wanted to close that pay gap, and we're giving $2,000 across the board to every other teacher in the state. And so we want teachers to be, I want every teacher to quickly get up, and many are, we have teachers making 70 and 80, but most teachers are in the 60s. I want to get up there as fast as we can to get everyone at that level. And we've set it up so that hopefully the best teachers get the most money. We leave that up largely to the school district. So we passed that bill out of the Senate during the regular session. Teacher pay, it was Senate Bill 9, but it failed in the House. It was the Teacher Bill of Rights. It also talked about making sure there's discipline in the classroom, because a lot of teachers are leaving for that reason. Their classes are unruly. And we talked about a number of things. We passed a parental bill of rights for school choice and a teacher bill of rights. And we had the pay raise in it, but it didn't pass the House. In the session we're in now that just wrapped up last week, after we passed property tax, we passed the original bill over with the teacher pay raise in the bill. The House made a decision, and I respect the decision, but they made a decision to only focus on property taxes this time around, and we'll be back in October to address that issue. So I gave you a long answer, but a really detailed answer, because the teachers have to understand they're so valued. They need to understand they're valued. And we want to do the best we can to attract the best and the brightest to teaching. Jack, I was chair of education in 2013. I love public education. School choice does not destroy public education, by the way. Only about 5%. If you go statewide, the history of school choice in the country, only about 5% of parents opt for school choice because most like their schools and the kids like their friends. But every parent deserves a right to put their child in the school that's best for their child. And that's their decision, not the school system's decision. But it was interesting. Back in 2013, when I was chair of education, Jack, we were talking about why we couldn't get men and women to go into teaching like they used to. And there was, I don't know who it was, and he said, well, Senator, Mr. Chairman, let me tell you why. He said, the answer is simple. And when he said it to me, it was simple, but I'd never thought about it. He said in the 60s and 70s and the 80s and the 90s, for women particularly, they didn't have many job options. The corporate world was closed to them. Legal professions were closed to them. And we're talking about in general terms here. Obviously, we had female lawyers and doctors and in the corporate world, but you became a nurse or a teacher. So the very best and brightest became teachers. But starting in the mid-90s, and rightfully so, that glass ceiling was removed and women were welcome to every profession. And so women today, and my wife's a great example. She graduated from school in the 70s. She was a teacher. She didn't have a lot of options then. So we lost that part of the workforce. And so we have to go to our young people today, Jack, and say, teaching is a great profession. You can make great money. It's a great job. It's an important job. It's a noble profession. That's what we must do. And one of the things, Jack, and I'll wrap up with this, and most people don't even know, is that if you'll become a math or science teacher, we will pay practically for all of your 4-year education. You just have to agree to teach 8 years. That's it. We'll pay for it if you become a math or science, because that's where we're really short. So Jack, that's a long answer to your easy question, but we'll eventually pass a teacher pay raise, I believe, in October. And after we get through with this impeachment trial in September, and we'll move forward. But the Senate's already passed the raise 2 different times. The House will come together and pass it eventually.
And it'll be permanent raises?
Yes, it depends on the bill. See, what we passed in the special session, so we passed permanent raises in the regular session because it wasn't on the call. It wasn't a permanent raise. It was a supplemental raise. So every teacher would have gotten the money for the next 2 years. And then in 25, we just come back and expand it. But now, because education will be on the call, whatever we pass, is if we have our way, will be a permanent raise, not just a one-time raise.
Coming up next, more of our interview with Democratic State Representative Victoria Neave Criado of Mesquite. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas returns in a moment. Democratic State Representative Victoria Neave Criado of Mesquite, who's also the chair of the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus, expressed outrage about a state trooper's allegation of mistreatment against migrants at the southern border. She says she'd like to see state legislative hearings.
When we hear of women, a pregnant mom who was trapped in barbed wire while she's having a miscarriage, when we hear of children who are being pushed back into the river by our own DPS troopers, who are our top law enforcement agency in the state, is extremely disturbing and concerning. So we're glad to hear that the federal government is stepping in to evaluate that. There are numerous concerns, even potential violations of international treaties that are implicated here. And so for us, regardless of how folks feel about immigration, having respect for the human dignity of folks, of children, of moms who are attempting to come to our nation for a better life, and just making sure that our state is doing the right thing and at least treating them with the dignity for their life.
And this comes on top of the Office of Inspector General at Texas DPS launching an investigation into this state trooper's claims that officers were told to push people back into the Rio Grande in the Eagle Pass area and not give them water. And so and Mexico's president just came out now and said, this is inhumane. So what do you make of the fact that the state has launched its own investigation into this?
Yes, no, we're glad that the state is investigating this, and we commend the DPS trooper who was willing to step forward, essentially, is a whistleblower to shine a light on what's just flat out wrong. It is about ensuring that in this extreme Texas heat, if you see somebody without water, and we have the water, the fact that DPS troopers were told to not give them water is unconscionable. It's about life and respecting life in our state. And so we commend the DPS trooper, and we're, as a caucus, want to ensure that every legislative tool, that any investigation, including by our state and by the federal government, is launched, and that the truth comes to light.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, what more can be done? What more do you think should be done? What legislative tools do you think that you can use in this case?
We are in ongoing conversations. I think that one, it's necessary assuming that we don't get the information that we need, besides having particular meetings with DPS, which we are already involved in and working on, but two, having legislative hearings on these issues to investigate specifically what other policies and procedures are being put in place that are potentially violating federal law or international laws. We know that there's an issue. We acknowledge that it is time for change, certainly at the federal government, especially. We need comprehensive immigration reform, but really what we need more than ever is for folks to put partisanship aside to try to resolve this issue. We as our caucus is a bipartisan caucus, and there have been solutions put forth by various members of our caucus to address a lot of the issues on the border. And some of those were put into law and some were not. And at the same time, we dealt with some really extreme policy proposals this last legislative session that would have taken us backwards. And for example, creating a civilian vigilante force that wouldn't just operate on the border, but the entire state. So what we're seeing here is disrespect. It's just a flat out unconscionable policies that should not be a part of our DPS policy. So we want to ensure that if there are moms, if there are children, that individuals who are asylum seekers go through the proper process and are connected with the federal counterparts as they're entering the border.
I wanted to ask you, have you, as chair of your caucus, have you or has anybody else had any discussions with Speaker Dade Phelan or his office, or at the very least the Homeland Security Committee in the House, to launch its own investigation, or at the very least to establish hearings?
what I'd like to say is that we've had some confidential discussions with some individuals. I don't want to state who or what yet. We want to ensure that things like that do happen, and we're trying to ensure that we take the proper procedures and protocols because it's not just Homeland Security. There are other potential committees that have jurisdiction over different issues, and so we're trying to analyze the best option. Time is of the essence as well, but we want to ensure that this information gets in the hands of our members of both parties and members of the Texas House of Representatives and the Texas Senate as well.
And what other committees are you referring to?
For example, we think that the potential criminal jurisprudence committee should be involved here. There's an international relations committee that could potentially see the issues between the potential violations of the international treaty. So I chair the county affairs committee. We want to evaluate what potential agencies or how counties would be impacted by things like this and on the border. And so we're having ongoing discussions. We want to do our due diligence and ensure that the laws that we pass as this information is coming out. And we're so thankful again to the trooper, to the media for highlighting this issue. We want to make sure that we get to the root of it so that individuals are not dying as they are coming into the hands of DPS.
And what did you make of the joint statement yesterday that was issued by Governor Abbott and Steve McCraw, who directs Texas DPS, the Texas Border Czar Mike Banks, and the Texas Adjutant General Major General Thomas Selzer, saying, quote, that no orders or directions were given that would compromise the lives of those attempting to cross the border illegally? What do you make of it?
I think the DPS troopers' willingness to come forward, show how this is inhumane, really is speaking truth to what's really happening. And I can see how some of the statewide leaders would attempt to deny it, but that email from that particular trooper is every person that's crossing in many of our eyes are children of God. And the fact that we are crossing a line, the fact that he's willing to openly state the policies and procedures that they have been instructed to do in rejecting, pushing children back into the river, having barrels that are wrapped with barbed wire that are essentially death traps for people crossing the river is seriously concerning. And we want to ensure that the federal laws and that international laws are not being violated by our Texas DPS troopers.
In that same release yesterday, the joint statement, they also said that the state is using the concertina wire and the buoys to act as a deterrent to prevent people from crossing the Rio Grande. What do you make of that? I also spoke with the lieutenant governor yesterday who had seen the article but wasn't aware of the whole situation. But he blamed President Biden for the situation for people crossing into the United States. So your reaction to both those things?
Sure. We know that deterrent policies really haven't been working. I'm a daughter of an immigrant. When my dad came to our country without papers, he's a citizen now and proud to be an American citizen. We need to look at the underlying root causes of why people are coming to our country. We are the best country in the world. And the fact that people are willing to risk their lives to escape the situation that they're in, willing to, bring their children to our countries. There's a huge labor shortage in our state and in our country. There is a huge need for workers in our country, in our state. And so we need to look at the root causes of also the issues in other nations that are driving individuals to come to our great nation.
I also wanted to ask you about the property tax relief bills that passed last week. Some people said finally. So what was your reaction? You were among those who voted for it.
Yes, and I will say that Democrats have long championed an increase to the homestead exemption. And so that was one of the pieces that we were really pleased and wanted to ensure, because many of our constituents will benefit from that. There were some missed opportunities with respect to the property tax legislation. So, and one of those is the fact that renters were left out. And the other big issues is that teachers, we are seeing teachers leave the profession by the droves, and we need them. We have a teacher shortage. And the fact that we were not able to have amendments that Democrats proposed, that we were not able to have language in the legislation to ensure teacher pay, the fact that they kicked the ball for a few months down the road is not enough. It's something that we should have addressed, that we tried to get into this piece of legislation that we voted on, and it was blocked by Republicans. But we have teachers' backs. We want to ensure that we raise their pay, and not just teachers, but educators, individuals, janitors, where all the workers in our schools have the money that they need, so that we keep them in the profession, and we have enough teachers to educate our 5.5 million kids in Texas public schools.
Before I ask you another follow-up on the teacher salaries, as it relates to the renters, why was the push to include renters and to give renters a break so late in the process?
There's been a push for renters since the beginning. I think it's been a matter of how renters would benefit. So the renters pay taxes just like everybody else, and helped contribute to this huge record surplus that we had. And so they should also reap the benefits in their rent. We know that in Dallas, for example, Dallas County rent continues to increase, and there's no guarantee that, with all due respect to landlords, there's no guarantee that cost savings is going to be passed down to the renter. So that's something that Democrats have been advocating for, to ensure that renters are included in some way in this property tax relief proposal.
And then back to the teacher pay raises. I spoke with both the speaker and the lieutenant governor in the last week, and they said both of them said that they are committed to approving teacher raises. They said that there's $5 billion set aside in the budget for increasing school funding, and much of that would include for teacher raises. What specifically would you like to see?
I think that, the funding that has been allocated, that was, months in the making, and we should have had it done. We should have passed that now to get the dollars in our school districts' hands, who are going through their budgets appropriations right now. And some school districts are having to dip into their reserves to even try to have something and ask teachers to stay. But we want to give them a teacher increase. We want to increase the basic allotment as well, which is the amount of money that a child would that a school district would obtain per child. In Texas, we have one of the lowest amounts of investment and per pupil spending, and we're the best state in the country. And in order for our economic prosperity to continue, we want to make sure that every single kid, regardless of their zip code, is educated and has the best education. And so to do that, we need to put our money where our mouth is, and ensure that we get these dollars into the hands of our public schools to educate every kid.
I know back in the 2019 session, teachers, I believe, were given a $5,000 raise. Is that something that you'd like to see this time? Is that even possible, given the money that was set aside?
I think that we want to give them that or more. We want to ensure that whatever funds that are in the budget that are appropriate, allocated equitably to the school districts across the state. That, for example, Dallas, I represent parts of Dallas, Garland, and Mesquite, that are 3 school districts, and school districts in North Texas and Dallas County get the funds that they deserve and should be entitled to. And so I think that the pay raise, the actual number, is to be discussed and debated, but we want to make sure that they're taken care of, so that we don't lose more teachers and we get more individuals into the profession, so that so that our kids have all the resources that they need to prosper.
And that's all for Eye on Politics this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jack Fink. Hope to see you next week. You're watching CBS News Texas.